Good morning, Ballroom 2 people. My job is to facilitate Corey. I was going to say moderate, but I'm sure his views will be deeply revolutionary, so I won't stop him. And I'm just going to say, here he is. He is going to the podium now, not far to go, and he will finish in time to give you questions. Good audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about my library and myself, so I'm not going to do any introductions. I'm Corey Seeman, Director of Kresge Library Services at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. My presentation, Don't Get Married to the Results, Managing Library Change in the Age of Metrics, is all about the changes that we've gone through. And when I posted it on Twitter, it went to Facebook, and my stepbrother, Blaine, freaked out because he saw that all that came through in his feed was a tweet or a Facebook post from me saying, "Don't get married." And I mentioned to him that would be something that my wife would present on. So I've been at the University of Michigan 10 years. It will be 10 years later this month. And if we want to use an alt metric, that's 4 football coaches. So it's kind of an interesting way to think about things. So last week I was on campus and I saw this wonderful squirrel, and it just captured what I want to do. He's sort of measuring the acorn that got away. So what I'm going to do today is talk about some opening thoughts and assessment, problems with numbers, library changes, and you, about Kresge Library and what we're doing. And if at any point I move away from the mic, please let me know. And then telling your story, and this is really about what we're trying to do at Kresge. So I am a bit of an iconoclast when it comes to assessment. I think that we can rely on our gut to be a little more definitive about what we're doing. Oh, by the way, the slides are available online. There's a tiny URL that'll show up again at the end. I think that assessment needs to be periodic and continual, but it can't be the sort of the here-all and end-all. One of the things that was really wonderful, so I saw a colleague from Grand Valley in the audience. Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan, has a library that anyone would be envious of. And they had a conference this August that was fantastic, Rethink at Libraries for a New Age. And this is a picture of the library. It helps when Steelcase is a partner, but they really did a great job. And it was all about design thinking, which is really about empathy, which is really about understanding the end users. This is a graphic that really focuses on what our world looks like in business. And I know there are a couple of business librarians here. The resources, the faculty, maybe in history it's more similar, but at least in business, the student needs are different than the faculty needs. So faculty needs include scholarly journals, articles, books, data sets, etc. Student needs are articles, company and industry information, market reports. Community, we work with alumni. We have some alumni resources. They're more geared towards students. So assessing becomes very tricky when we're looking at different populations with different needs. And then finally, I was talking to my colleague from Michigan State and said, all of my pets will make an appearance somewhere here. This is my cat, Cosmo. And the reason why I chose this picture is because he's in a postal service box. And academic campuses, I feel very strongly about this, are on-campus monopolies. We are the sort of the way that people get information. And so we have to work differently. If we think about some of the frustrations that we have with IT departments, who are also on-campus monopolies, we'll sort of get the same thing. So I want to talk a little bit about some problems with numbers. So,
close to the microphone, Paul.
What?
A bit too close to the microphone.
Oh, okay. Is this better?
You were
Okay.
talking a bit.
So it's a political season. It will continue to be a political season for one more freaking year. Stupidity with numbers. So for those of you who are keeping score, 271,000 jobs, 5% unemployment. That's good news, unless you're Ben Carson, Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So coal's pricing is something I've always talked about insofar as part of the ridiculous notion of numbers. When you spend $55 and realize you've saved over $200. John Oliver has a great piece on school testing that I encourage everyone to look at. And then Halloween. So we had 2 trick-or-treaters. We live out in the middle of nowhere. We bought a big candy bag, and so we were able to give that out. Yeah, bad return on investment, but happy kids, so it was worth it. In my picture in Sked, that's my dog, and those are my nieces. It's my dog, Flapjack. So big data, we were talking a little bit, so Gary freaked us all out. He freaked me out about big data. And I think that people are really excited about the possibility and the potential, but I don't really see that this is just right around the corner for us. And I think that it may actually be years before we can harness some of this information. So I'm not that enamored with it. Back to Kohl's, retail pricing is really important. So this is a business database, and we are told that for our $5,000 quarterly investment, our students have downloaded $3.7 million worth of content. Now, no one at University of Michigan can turn $5,000 into $3.7 million, even Coach Harbaugh. So I'm going to think that these numbers maybe aren't as accurate or useful. And then another thing about retail pricing, I'm not hugely enamored with a cost per use. I think it's a good metric, it's good to know, but it doesn't really tell the whole story. I did notice George's Loan Company on King Street, money to loan on articles of value. So if we just had pawn shops near our campuses, we would know what books are valuable. And there's my cat Wanda proving once and for all that cats prefer print to E. So we are trying to connect usage with value, but it's not always clear cut. And I think that we're trying to answer the question, we might be burning daylight. So more problems with numbers. We are very good about making tiny cuts. If we go flatline, we all know that we have to reduce resources. So we make small incremental changes, and then taken holistically or taken over the course of a matter of years, we end up with some big problems that we really change our fundamental value. And that we drop below the just noticeable threshold. This is a can of Chase and Sanborn, which was a very popular coffee brand, and now it's really kind of the worst coffee you can get. So the small changes over years can lead to bigger issues. This is something I found from The Economist very recently. Most of us flew here, and it's very sad. So treating flyers well apparently is bad for airlines' bottom line. So this gentleman here is cramped in his seat. I flew on a 757 and I didn't have half that much room. So I'm not sure how he did well. But when we sit there, we have a service that we're providing to a campus, and the more that we do, it does provide some benefit, but it's not really adding sometimes to our bottom line. And then change happens. So this is the Chase Furniture Company, which is one of 3 furniture stores north of here in King. I'm at the Hyatt Place, so I've been walking back and forth. It's now the Charleston College of Law. One furniture store just closed, and the other's still open, probably not for long. This is Reed Brothers, which is a fabric store that I went into. There is a sign that says stereo department, and I think it's a trap. So I didn't go down that road, so I'm not sure exactly, or that path, I'm not sure exactly what it is. But this is the dynamic of what we're dealing with. Very quickly through this, Catherine talked this morning about Moneyball. I've done some stories about, or some articles about baseball history as well back in the day. We spent more time talking about contests than context. And so that's really where I think the metrics do us poorly. So in summary here, when we think of library statistics, a lot of us think of items, access, usage, head count. A lot of us have been talking about what is the outcomes, not the outputs. And we're trying to make connections that are really hard to find. What is the library contribution toward retention, for example? What is the library contribution to faculty success and to tenure promotion? I think that there is a lot of issues here that are really very tricky. And then we also love to oversimplify our numbers. So this was from 2 winters ago. It was negative 21 degrees. I drove the car and I had a thermometer in it. It was my wife's car. So everyone loves dashboard indicators, and they do a really, really great job of sort of dumbing down what's going on and simplifying it. It does a really good job, and I'll get back to this at the end. It does a great job of telling you how you're running, but it doesn't necessarily tell you about environments at your institution. Library change and you. So change, of course, is a very personal experience, and your mileage may vary. And we all have change from a very distinct point of view. If you ask anyone in the library field 35 years ago when the conference started, they would tell you, oh my God, things are changing so much with OCLC. We used to do such curated cataloging records. I believe right now we're at the tip of real systemic change. I'm at a departmental library, a small 19-person library that's now even smaller. Medical libraries, science libraries, and business libraries have all been contracted. One of the things, this is the Skillman branch, 1931 in Detroit. It's a beautiful building, and across the facade it says, the fountain of wisdom flows through books. It's a really beautiful sentiment, and certainly the case in 1931. But the changing use of space is something that is really important. Stephen Bell, who he gave a keynote a couple of years ago, did a great column not that long ago about external forces. We always talk about internal change that we want to do, and that's great, but the external forces are the bigger issues. And he talked about Sweetbriar closing and then not closing, LaSalle University dealing with dramatic decreases in tuition dollars. This is just my thought in summing it up. Our virtue is not our salvation. That's why I said it was me. So about Kresge, I'm going to go through this quickly so I can move on. So we're an independent library. We're built in the 1980s, and when you have a library built in the 1980s, you have lots of stacks and you have lots of items. We were open 108 hours a week. We had seating for 700 students. Very visible, very easy to find. We had originally a collection of 140,000, then it was reduced to 70, but we were in a constant state of library erosion. Here's some pictures, very crowded, and it wasn't like this is the one day a year it was crowded. This is pretty much every Monday afternoon to Thursday at 5. At U of M, Thursday's your drinking night, so everyone, Thursday night, the place clears out, and then Friday, as people sober up, they come back in, so it's usually around 10, 11. But we don't have that anymore. And then on the bottom, you can barely make it out, but that's a giant mascot Sprout, because General Foods was recruiting that day. I'm going to skip over this because they just created I'm going to read this really quickly, and I apologize. This just came from some Ross faculty who are writing about the Ross project, and they want to talk about positives. So I'm going to read this. This just came yesterday. The second challenge involved the downsizing of Kresge Library. As a result of the construction of a new building on the Ross School campus and the demolition of a former library location, Kresge Library lost its entire physical space. The library was no longer a place with stacks of books, and I'll explain why it's bold, and journals, nor a go-to place for students to study. The leader of the library relayed his unit's choice to avoid sulking, rebelling, or resisting. Instead, the positive pillar was a consciously employed as a reminder to look at the process in a particular way towards focusing on what we might have and what is working right rather than what we lost. The library director was able to create a positive vision for the ephemeral library, explain that in a second, including publishing academic journal articles, his vision on Library of the Future. These articles and his leadership allowed Ross to become a pioneer in creating the Library of the Future. Okay, so two things. So first thing, I'm going to go to the second thing. I'm referring to this as the ethereal library, not ephemeral library. So I made that clear. I grew up in New Jersey, so the fact that I can say anything is pretty awesome. And I asked them to change stacks of books, because stacks of books sounds like we're an episode of Hoarders yet to come. So, but I think this captures what we're doing. It's not on the slides that are available because, again, I just got it, but I guess it'll be coming out in print at some point soon. This is our library. 27,000 feet. Now we're around 5 and change. There is 6 group study rooms across the top. There are a few tables, a few terminals for Bloomberg and things like that. And then we have open office behind. There's very little room for stacks, almost nothing. We have room for about 200 books, which incidentally is the same number that the Mission San Juan Capistrano had in 1834. So I thought that was cool. I think they were trying to prove a different point. When we first started designing this, we were really trying to bend over backwards to create a space that students could still use. And then it dawned on us, we can't do it. There's not enough real estate. So we had to sort of realign. Failure, very importantly, is an option that we can deal with. In the discussion that we had with the leadership team, we talked about the academic nature of the collection. We talked about the fact that 90%, or our estimate, did not have a digital counterpart. And if we were to get rid of it, it's gone. And people asked the question, well, maybe it wasn't that important if it didn't have a digital counterpart. And of course, in this crowd, you're like, oh, but for people trying to fit a lot of building in a small space, it becomes a question that they ask. We did have some redundancy with the main library, and our colleagues at the U of M have been great. They actually took on our unique content. We did have circulation of around 10 to 14,000 a year over the last couple of years. It wasn't insignificant. It was actually pretty decent. But the big thing for us, I explained, is that if we go this route, I can't collect print. I can't collect non-electronic format. I won't have the space. And in the end, that was determined to be okay. And so in the end, we lost our space. So we're shifting from the library as space to a library as service. And there's some very, very interesting things. And so to follow what Catherine said this morning, it is not only our moment of loss, it is our moment of opportunity. So to talk about those things sort of at the same point. This is actually, people have heard about moving of the tree. That's the tree that moved to the front of the school. That's the last cart of books that rolled out of the building, and the library is to the right of the tree. Libraries are going through all sorts of shifting right now. A lot of librarians are taking on more teaching roles instead of being bibliographers, and it really is a whole lot of change going on. The library did not close, although I was asked last night, oh, you're here? I thought your library closed. And it's totally legit. I can understand that. And what I'm saying is that we didn't close, we lost our lease. So what are we doing now? We are trying to be very entrepreneurial. We have a long history of doing that. And we're doing that with all except the bottom one. Entrepreneurs will always talk about new approach to a problem, new or old, new market opportunity, creative thinking, empathetic focus. Willingness to fail. The exit strategy, and that came up in the session yesterday, we don't have an exit strategy right now, so that's really how we're just a little different. What we want to do is, how do we tell the story? So we only got the 200 books. ARL stats are a breeze, so I've got that going for me. And we used our budget really to reframe how things are going. The change of library as a place to library as a service was huge. Gertrude Stein's quote about the Oakland of her youth, there's no there, is really about not being able to recognize the place that you worked in, the place that you used. For us, the big thing is a loss of established identity. And so, you see a building that's open and it's great, and that's all wonderful. So a lot of the things I want to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so really stem from my dad, and here we are. Here he is. My dad was a great innovator in the New Jersey retail space. He owned a clothing store and was one of the first true discounters in New Jersey, and it really kind of started a movement with discount malls. And so the retail focus really helps me at least, frame what we're trying to accomplish. Balancing is really important. Academic librarians try to balance from today and tomorrow, build the collection for now and down the road. Being E-only, there are opportunities to do that, but we're not really in a great shape to do that. And I think it's kind of a big obligation for us right now. And so we're really focused on the short term, which really creates a very, very different kind of library. Thinking about the future is really a good thing. It's not something that we can easily do right now. And here's a squirrel bearing nuts for later. And squirrels, by the way, do remember where they have put those nuts as they cache them all over the grounds. The big thing for us is that the school, our mission is the mission of the school. So the school went through and they were talking about positive pillar. There are 4 pillars: action, analytic, boundaryless, and positive. And everything we do at Ross School of Business needs to funnel into one of those. So we do not have our own specific mission at Kresge. We basically say it's that. And so what we've done is we've created a document that says, for each of these 4 things, here's how we support it. And we control that, but it really ties us to what the leadership team wants, which I think benefits us at the end. Connecting with stakeholders is really important. We had conversations with faculty, staff, and students, ironically, after the decision was made, but for whatever reason, the communication was such that it all happened very, very quickly. This is the Kresge staff, the great people I work with. Actually, we first found out that this might be happening during a shifting process. And we were integrating some books, and we couldn't really stop in the middle of it. So we had to go through it, even though we knew it was possible. And so we did this in the summer of 2013. By going through this work, we actually were able to create a clean slate and try to figure out what is needed by our community. And we use the mission sort of as a North Star reference, and we move in that direction. One of the things that's really important, although we are hard to find and a lot of people think we're closed and there's a lot of confusion about Kresge, communication is of course a huge issue. We're still central to reference, and our reference numbers are pretty consistent and actually maybe even trending up. We have an expanded role. We have some capacity that we've been able to redirect to reference, and so we have actually more people doing reference than before. And this is one of the academic deans and one of the faculty members very important in MAP, which is our multidisciplinary action programs, where we have our embedded librarian program. So, you know, if our reference numbers imploded in addition to our space, they would be making some dramatic changes, but the service again saved us out. We've always strived for the sort of the high class problem. The high class problem is one of trying to figure out capacity versus the low class problem, trying to figure out how to get people to use it. We have way too many low class problems in publishing, librarianship, etc. This is our annex. We actually couldn't find space in the B School for this, so the great people over at Law set us up, which is actually symbolic. I'm looking over my friend Breezy from Michigan State, because their business library is also in the Law, so we have that in common with our good friends in East Lansing. So we were doing what the school needed. So a lot of people are erring toward sort of creating, we want to teach classes, we want to be more educators, we want to do bigger and loftier things. What we determined was that there was an opportunity to go in and actually create, have the library manage a program that the school wanted, and it was an exam and assignment program, so that they could hand back exams, some of which were actually, the students could look at it, but then they had to be returned. This was a service that was run through our faculty support unit, and they couldn't handle it. So it was folded into the library, which actually was great for the circulation staff who didn't have anything to circulate. So it actually did fantastic things, because it was a service that the school wanted. Most importantly, from my perspective, it saved jobs, and it produced a real value, and it was a real win when we needed one. From our exit survey, the school surveys the students. We have some MBA student exit surveys. The good news, Kresge libraries are amazing. Dee, who's one of our Denguela Quicklies, was a great help for my project. Shout out to Sally Ziff, who was phenomenal during our MAP project. Laura Burdish gets a lot of praise here as well. Kresge might be one of the best at the school. That's all good. On the downside, Kresge being closed for the second year was a big loss. Will it get better in the new building? Maybe, maybe not. One of my favorite was there were a lot of people complaining about the library being closed, and one person complained about the hours of the library. And so it's like, well, if it's closed, are there hours? So, but the students were equating Kresge as space, not service. And this is actually something UNCG, Greensboro, Tim Bucknell at a presentation I went to yesterday was talking about how people are coming into the library, are not using the materials, they're not using a lot of the materials, but you're using the flat surface. They're using it as a place to study, and that's what our students wanted. That was a great session with Rick. So the time horizon of our work has really changed. And this has been really tricky. I have realigned us for the short term, and so it's the short tail. Okay, it's all I got. Speaking of metrics that don't mean anything, I have over 17,000 pictures on Flickr of University of Michigan campus squirrels. So every so often you'll see a number that doesn't make any sense, and that's 2 of them. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to share our accomplishments as they resonate with our stakeholders. It's not aligned with the profession, it's not aligned with tradition, but it's going to actually, I think, put us in a better spot down the road. From the budget request, we've shared the ways that we manage these spaces and these issues. We changed our name to Kresge Library Services because Kresge Library connotates a place. Services at the end connotates what people can expect to find there. We moved to electronic course materials through study.net. Reference location after hours help has moved a lot, but our reference interaction has actually increased, I think. Last thing I want to talk about a little bit, here's a picture of me when I was 4. I'm the little one. That's my older brother, and that's my dad in 1968. When you're going through dramatic change, there's a great tendency to go back and think about the way things were. We don't have the opportunity to do that, and I think a lot of people, if they're in this position, may not have this. I've given staff a lot of flexibility to choose their own path. Some people are looking, and that's fine. It's a different kind of library, and it's not the library that everyone necessarily wants to work at. We want to consider services that are going to meet the needs of the school rather than ones that we need to sell with. The title comes from something my dad always told me: don't get married to the results. And it's really, I think, really very, very useful because it is that, and it was always something he would say whether something happened good or bad. Sure, he got married 4 times in his life, so maybe there's a different message here. But one of the things that we've, especially in big change, we've decided that we weren't going to start with any predetermined measures of success. So we didn't have any, we needed reference to go up by X amount. It doesn't really matter. What we wanted to do is we wanted to look at what we were doing, tweak, and be nimble enough to change. We look at usage stats really as indicators, not validators. And so we try to tell that story as best we can. And having the appearance of success doesn't mean you actually have it. And so that's one of the things that I think we need to be really careful about. Not to say that we need to live a paranoid world, but we need to live in constant sort of reflection of what our schools need. And, attaining metrics like school testing, getting back to what, the reference to John Oliver, could be at the expense of other elements. If we wanted people to use our resources, we could thrust it down. We could thrust the discovery layer down their throat. It's not always what people need. And so it's really a matter of trying to be attuned to what our patrons need. And don't let yourself be judged by what we didn't accomplish. I have a very patient boss right now. I have a different boss, and I'll have a different boss in January. But they're very, very good about understanding the role that we're going in. And then one closing thought. So 1 block from here, if you go on Calhoun and you go to Bay, this happened. This is was my mother's car. My mother used to live here. and she'll live here again. And so we were driving back from Fort Sumter. It was our first visit to town, and we were rear-ended. And so when people love talking about dashboard indicators, I will share that dashboard indicators are wonderful to tell you how you're doing, but it doesn't necessarily tell you about the idiot behind you. And that is a very, very tricky situation on our campuses, on our universities, on our communities, et cetera. So being aware of all that is something that is really important. The slides are right here, tiny URL, CHS15, Corey, and with that, we're at 11 o'clock, so if you need to leave early to get to your next session, that's great. If you have questions, we will do that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Questions. Is there anybody has a question? It's probably best if they walk forward to the mic. Actually, I'm sorry about that, but you have a question over there. Yeah. There's a mic here in the front. Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Linda Galloway from Syracuse. So you mentioned that you had high-class problems and low-class problems, but I didn't catch what they were.
The high-class problems and it's just more general. The high-class problems being how do we get more capacity? One of our high-class problems, if you want to put it that way, is supporting action learning. Action learning is our embedded librarian program where we have a librarian assigned to a group of students working on a project. That has a program that has started when I started at Ross 9 plus years ago. There were about 80 teams all told, maybe 100. Now there's around 300. So as that program is expanded, we've had to reshift capacity in order to address that. And so the high-class problem is meeting the needs that are demonstrated by the school and appreciated. The low-class problem becomes if we have a new service and we're trying to get people to use it. The example I'll use happened early on in my time here. We had some faculty who said, we need a late night copy service. There was someone who mentioned the fact that libraries are, I don't know, it was Courtney Young maybe yesterday in her great talk. She talked about how libraries are the first to open and the last to close. And it's so totally true. Many of us are open all the time. At U of M, the undergraduate library is there. So we had this capacity, so we were going to do this evening faculty printing service, and it was used like 3 times. And we did the marketing, and it just wasn't, the market wasn't there. So that's the example of a low-class problem. I think a lot of us, and I've been guilty about this too, you see things, you go to a conference, you come back and say, oh my God, you ought to see the great things happening at Michigan State and Ohio State. Oh, who am I kidding? Nothing great happens at Ohio State. So actually, I love Ohio State and Ohio Link. I'm an old Toledo guy. So you think about that, and they say, "Oh my God, we got to do this. We got to get a makerspace," and all of a sudden, it just doesn't hit because maybe the market isn't there, the interest isn't there. So I think it's really just about making sure you're aligned with what is needed.
One more thing. Was your father's jingle "See Seeman's first"?
No.
No? Okay.
No, it wasn't. But that's another company out there that people thought was mine, but it was my family's, but it wasn't. He had no jingle, so he was able to contribute that to society. So.
Steve Knowlton from the University of Memphis. You talked about informal assessment, and in my observation, that's often relaying of anecdotes out of context. Is there a way to do informal assessment that is slightly more rigorous?
Well, I think that one of the the questions about informal assessment that's a little more rigorous. What we haven't done is we haven't had our own library survey, but we've been trying to craft, at least in the exit survey of MBA students and BBA students, having questions that are meaningful so that the students are only surveyed once and we can get it in context. For me, the most valuable resource that we get, and this is benefit, we are institutionally part of the B School, so when they get surveyed at the end of the year, they get surveyed about computing services, academic services, career services, and the library. So seeing that in context is really important, because if we ask them on a scale of 1 to 7 how we're doing, and they say 5.5, that doesn't, it's better than not. But then if the average is 6.5, then we've got a problem. So that's what we've been able to do. The comments, that, and some of which I shared, I think are really critical for us. We're going to be playing with that a little bit, I think, as we continue to tweak. The thing is that we're not being consulted earlier on changes that are being made. We're sort of just in time being asked. And so as long as we're there and being able to connect, I think that's what we're doing effectively. It seems to resonate, at least with the leadership team. So,
some more questions. There's a lot of things. Oh, there we are. Thank you. Please say who you are.
Of course. I'm Miranda Bennett. I'm at University of Houston. And I think what you were kind of finishing up with in your response to the last question gets at what I was curious about, which is it sounds like the business school has a very strong mission statement or strategic plan or something with these 4 pillars. Is that something that you, as leader of the library or anyone on your staff, do you have any voice in developing the planning that's happening in the business school, or is that happening and then you're simply responding?
It's the latter.
Okay.
So the strategic plan came out, and it's more of a mission statement than a strategic plan. And I'm not saying that to be negative. I'm just saying that that's the way that it was rolled out. I mean, it's a strategic plan is something that has deliverables, measurables, etc. This has North Star kind of pointers. And so basically they rolled this out and they said, this is what we think the school is. And so our challenge is, how do we make sure that we're aligned? And if we said our main purpose is to ensure that there's scholarship available for researchers 20 years out, I think that could match. It could certainly match analytic, but it doesn't really match what the tone is. So it's a matter of really taking what they've given us and really making sure we match. And I think that a lot of us at a lot of campuses, we have those processes in place. It would have been nice if it was a more inclusionary system, but it wasn't. And so we just sort of roll with that.
And is your decision-making driven at all by priorities of the University of Michigan libraries, or are you really following the North Star of the business school?
It's the B School.
Okay.
We worked very collaboratively with our colleagues at the main library, and they helped us out immeasurably by taking our unique print. But we'll do a lot of collaborative purchase with them. But if they ask us to do something and it fits what we want to do, then we're all good and we contribute to shared purchases. But it's really about making sure that there's an end user benefit to us. What we've also done is we've tweaked some of our programs to expand to our remote campuses or regional campuses in Flint and Dearborn, which really isn't part of the Ross mission at all, but we think is important. So that's what we've been able to contribute.
Okay, thank you very much.
The lady coming forward, your name.
Good morning. I'm Susan Ariev, Academic Services Librarian for Education at the University of South Florida. And I originally worked for many years at Virginia Tech, and they were not allowed to have branch libraries. And so we created a program called the College Librarian Program, where we were placed out in the colleges and virtual branches is what we called it, instead of ethereal. And I heard that University of Michigan had a similar program called the Field Librarian Program. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. That's the main library.
Yeah.
And actually, the main library has contracted the number of departmental libraries that they've had, because we are independent and we get our funding from Ross.
Okay.
We didn't really fall into that umbrella. And
So have you thought about placing your librarians deeper into Ross, into departmental offices, nearer to the faculty?
They will not give us the space. But no, we're in the complex.
Yeah.
So we're in
You're
the
close,
building.
but you're not like right there seeing them on the same hallway or anything.
Only because that we share our part of the building, and the new building is going to be with computing services and marketing and communications, which is a really big group. Right now, we're actually in a modular office. I used to call it the Big Mo, now I call it Motown. And we're sharing it with finance, HR, and the PhD students. It's good for the PhD students, but it's really not great being with HR and finance, not because we don't like HR and finance, we love them, but it's not a student place.
And it's not, I was just wondering if you could, they had any space, whether you would want to be out there closer to them and distributing librarians with them, because it's interesting, the more proximity you have, the more you know how to plug yourself in.
Yeah. Well, we are very connected with the faculty. They know to contact us, and we'll be in the building. It's just that we will not be on. Instead of having an awesome second floor entrance, we're going to be on the fourth floor. We will be near the quiet study space that's being set aside, but that's independent from the library. So.
Well, best wishes.
Oh, thank you.
We've got time for a few more questions. Anybody has anything to ask? Bob, you've been very quiet, haven't you? No? You have no questions to ask?
Oh, thank you.
Is that before his arrival, I did a consulting project for the library on what the appropriate metrics would be to prove to an administrator that didn't like libraries why he should give the library as much money as he was giving.
Were you working with Tom Ali Doan?
Pardon?
Who are you working with?
It was an IT person.
Oh, okay. Michael Gordon?
That I don't remember, but that sounds reasonable.
He doesn't want to identify the person that caused this.
We are being recorded. No, actually, we've reported to a number of different people, and it's really quite fascinating. And one of the things is by virtue, I mean, we'll all report to different people. Provosts come and go, presidents come and go. We've reported to different spots, and different people have different passions. We have a very good relationship with people on our leadership team. As things were explained to me, as this decision was being made, it was a physics problem. The $100 million gift from Stephen Ross went this far, and we needed it to go this far, and they had to make up that difference, and that was the conundrum. But we've actually been, and there maybe it's a little bit of guilt money, but we've actually seen budget increases for electronic resources the last 2 years, which we hadn't seen for the previous 4. So if it's guilt money, I'm good.
Okay. And I would like to be recorded for posterity that I did not volunteer to make this comment. It was asked.
No, it's a fascinating story. I think that, as you know, I've been happy to share it because I think that I'm hoping it doesn't necessarily happen at a library near you, but it could.
Okay.
And
let me quickly just give the 2 metrics, which I'm not sure I would still defend. The first one was that if you looked at faculty publications, the materials came from the Kresge Library. And the second one is that the scope of the collection allowed faculty to choose a broader array of topics rather than to be limited by what the library held. And so at least at that point, I thought they were 2 good metrics.
No, and those are absolutely fantastic. No, we have a really good relationship with the faculty. They were consulted individually, but not holistically. I don't anticipate that if the faculty had an open forum and they were to discuss this, that things would have changed. The outcome would have changed all that much, especially given the fact that we've been able to retain unique print. The question is building the collection from here on out, and that becomes the trickier part. But we might, who knows? There might be a solution that presents itself in a couple years.
Well, I think that we've come to 1 minute before we have to leave and go to our next destinations. I think we should thank Corey again, perhaps. And
Thank you.
I was on the University of Michigan campus last weekend, and I saw squirrels taking selfies.
It's fantastic.